Dawn poured over the Serengeti like a long, slow breath. The grass took on a soft gold as the night backed away, reluctant to release its hold. In a low pocket of rock and thorn, a white lioness named Amara lay still. Her chest heaved with the aftershocks of a stubborn labor that had stretched through most of the night. The air was cool and clean. The birds had not yet found their voices. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if waiting. Then came the smallest sound in the world, a cub's first cry. Then another. Amara shifted and began to lick, steady and methodical, cleaning blood and birth from two tiny bodies the color of pale ivory. They pressed to her belly, searching with blind mouths for the one thing new life understands. She curled around them quiet muscle, warmth, and breath, making a circle that held the world in place. The third cry was different, thin, as if it had a long way to travel. Amara lifted her head and saw what the newborn light was only just beginning to reveal. The third cub was not white, not straw gold, not any shade meant to vanish in this sunlit country. He was black, not dark brown, not shadowed tan black like the last inch of night refusing to leave the morning. Amara froze, as if her body remembered something old and heavy. Then she lowered her head and licked him too. Slower this time, as if her tongue needed to make sense of what her eyes could not. He was hers. Not far away, on a low rise, a man adjusted a long lens. Ethan Carter had lived in this land long enough to know how mornings worked. Sit still. Breathe with the bush. Let the world come to you. He knew this white pride by their habits, and he knew Amara by the faint notch in her left ear. He had not come looking for miracles. He had come for honest days. But when he found the den and looked through the glass, the first frame showed him something his books had never promised. He leaned closer, not daring to whisper, surprised by his own breath. The black cub moved, and the lens answered with a trembling image of dark fur catching the new light with a faint sheen. Amara worked carefully, licking the small, dark body until it gleamed wet and new. The cub squirmed, reaching for warmth with a tiny paw, then dragged himself toward his siblings. He was slower, as if weight lived in his limbs. Amara nudged him closer and held still, patient in that way only a mother can be, letting him figure out where the world begins. The sun climbed. Flies found the den and were brushed away by Amara's tail. The two pale cubs made soft, satisfied sounds. The dark one rested, tried again, then finally found a teat. His whole body trembled with the work of pulling life into himself. Amara breathed through her nose, calm and steady. One foreleg braced near the entrance, eyes half-lidded, ears working, listening for anything that did not belong. It did not take long for the pride to notice. One by one, white shapes moved through the grass with the steady, forward motion of lions who had seen this scene before. Suri came first, the big female whose jawline carried old stories. Two younger lionesses followed, pausing to scent the air, reading the day. Amara lifted her head but did not stand. Suri stopped just outside the den's shadow line. She looked at Amara, then at the two white cubs, and her face softened the way it always does when new life appears. She leaned in, nose forward, breathing them in. Milk, damp fur, the soft pulse of something barely begun. A low, approving rumble rolled through her chest. Then the dark cub moved. It was only a small push of his hind legs, a tilt of his head as he tried to hold on. But the light caught him anyway, marking him like ink on a page. Suri's ears tipped back. Just a fraction. Not a snarl, not a threat. Hesitation tiny, but sharp enough to hook the instinct. The younger females went still. One lowered her head, then pulled back as if she had reached for a familiar step and found empty air. Ethan watched through glass that suddenly felt too small. He knew the word melanism. He knew how rare it was. He knew that color can be more than color in a place where survival depends on blending into the earth. He also knew lions are not cruel. They are practical in a way we sometimes mistake for hardness. He wrote a single line on the card by his knee. Dark cub with Amara. Nursing. Pride hesitant. Amara kept her eyes on Suri. Nothing in her face changed. Only the tip of her tail moved. The dark cub finished feeding and rested his chin against his mother's fur. Amara lowered her head, and for a moment, the world was only breathing two steady, one uneven and light, and the fourth slower and heavy with command. Suri stood there for a long count of seconds. Then the hard line in her shoulders eased. She stepped back, not far, just enough to give the den its small, sacred space. The younger lionesses followed. No ceremony, no announcement, only quiet recognition that something had entered their world that would need watching. The sun rose higher. Heat came in visible waves if you looked past the obvious. Amara shifted, stretching a hind leg with care. The dark cub tumbled, then righted himself with determined clumsiness. He was not strong, not yet, but he was here. He gave a small, breathy sound that was not quite a cry and not quite a sigh. Amara answered by resting her chin lightly across his back, the way a mother reassures without moving the world. Ethan lowered the camera and let his eyes do the work for once. He felt that familiar ache that comes when the bush shows you something simple and true. He wanted to believe warmth and milk and a mother's body might be enough to write a clean beginning. But even from his hill, the plain told him the rest of the story. The grass was gold. The ground was dust. Everything here had learned to be the color of the sun. He looked again at the dark cub and felt a slow pull behind his ribs, the kind that tells you a choice is coming, though you cannot yet see its shape. Some beginnings already carry the shape of what they will ask of you in the end. The days that followed looked unchanged to anyone passing through. But the pride was changing. The two white cubs grew strong quickly, round bellies, sure steps, bright impatience. They wrestled, bit ears, chased one another through short grass. Every sound they made was full of life, sharp, demanding, certain. The black cub did not disappear into the land the way his siblings did. Ethan saw him before he saw anything else. A dark mark in a bright country. Shadow Ethan had begun to think of him that way, even before he said the name out loud was smaller by nearly a quarter. His legs were thinner. His body seemed built for something gentler than this cruel place. He tried to join the games, but he was always late, always clumsy. When the white cubs tumbled into him, he would fall and lie still, blinking at the sky until Amara nudged him upright again. Amara endured with the same fierce calm Ethan had seen since the day they were born. During the day, she kept the cubs hidden under low brush. At night, the pride hunted. Sometimes they returned with the sweet smell of blood. Sometimes they returned empty, and you could feel the tension thicken the air. Ethan learned long ago that hunger rewrites everything: patience, loyalty, even love. One afternoon, while the heat shimmered like invisible water, Suri and two younger females approached the den earlier than usual. Amara lifted her head at once, her body going rigid. Shadow slept, stretched against her belly, his sides fluttering with shallow breaths. Flies ruled the afternoon. Suri stopped just outside the shade, watching. The white cubs woke and ran forward, tumbling over each other, climbing onto Suri's forelegs. She tolerated them, licking one gently, then pushing it away. Then her gaze fell on the black cub. He woke slowly, blinking into the light. The moment he stood, the color of his fur caught the sun like a piece of night set loose in daylight. Suri's ears flattened. She moved closer, too close, sniffing. Amara rose, blocking her path. Two lionesses stared at each other. For a long, still moment, the world around them vanished. Ethan, behind his camera, barely breathed. Then Suri snarled low and sharp. Not an attack. A warning. A statement of what was coming. She brushed past, muscles stiff with irritation. The younger females followed, circling once before moving on. But the message remained in the dust. This cub is a problem. That evening, Ethan watched Shadow try again to play with his siblings. They swatted at him half-heartedly, then left him behind. He sat watching them, his small dark tail twitching like a trapped shadow. When the light faded, Amara called them all in and gathered them close. Shadow settled at her side, half under her leg, his head tucked against her chest. Ethan could almost see the exhaustion in Amara's eyes, love fighting a losing battle with instinct. Days passed. The cubs explored farther. Amara tried to herd them back, but they were restless and curious. Shadow followed, slower, as if every step cost him more than it should. When the white cubs pounced on beetles or chased bird shadows, he watched, then tried to imitate them, hesitant but determined. Then the hunts failed again, and again. The pride's ribs began to show. Irritation moved through them like heat. One morning, Suri stalked straight toward the den. Amara rose to meet her halfway. Their bodies did not touch, but the space between them burned with the promise of violence. Shadow peered from behind his mother's leg, unaware of how much his existence cost. The standoff lasted only seconds. Suri turned sharply and left, tail high, her message delivered without words. Amara sank back to the ground, trembling slightly. Shadow crept closer and buried his face in her fur. Ethan lowered his camera and sat back, chest tight. He had seen this before with other species, other mothers. The pride had begun to separate the weak from the strong. It was never about cruelty. It was survival pure and cold as stone. He wrote, "The black cub grows slower. The pride is restless. Conflict is near." That morning the savannah burned gold. The grass stood tall and brittle under the weight of the dry season. Sound carried for miles. Buzzing flies, distant hooves, the restless breathing of predators waiting for the hunt. Ethan sat on the hood of his Jeep, camera balanced on his knee. He had watched the tension build for weeks, the whispers of dominance, the cold glances, the way hunger thickened the air with impatience. But today felt different. Today felt like a decision. Suri paced near the edge of the clearing, tail flicking like a whip. The pride had failed 3 hunts in a row. Ribs showed under white coats. The cubs cried more than they played. Amara lay apart from the others, her 3 cubs pressed close. The 2 white ones fought softly for the best spot at her belly. Shadow stayed near her hind legs, half hidden in shade, leaner now, fur duller from lack of nourishment. Ethan caught the faint tremor in Shadow's legs each time he stood. Suri turned her head and fixed her eyes on Amara. The message needed no words. When the hunt began at evening, the pride slid into the tall grass, a formation honed by instinct. Amara followed behind, then pushed the cubs toward a nearby ridge for safety. The herd grazed 200 yards away. Suri crouched low, muscles coiled. 2 lionesses flanked her, their white coats melting into the savannah's pale light. It was perfect, until the cub moved. Ethan saw it before they did. A patch of black fur shifting in the grass, catching the last light of sunset. Shadow had followed. Too curious, too young, too unaware of what his color meant. The first alarm call shattered the silence. Head snapped up, hooves erupted. The herd scattered like wind-blown leaves. Suri lunged, but the prey was gone. Dust clouded the horizon where dinner had just vanished. Furious roars carried through the dry air, echoing across the plain. Amara spun, eyes locking on her cub. Shadow froze, trembling, confused. Amara charged toward him, not to harm him, but to cover him with her body, her growl cutting through the rising anger of the pride. But it was too late. The damage was done. Suri approached first, face tight with frustration. Younger females followed sharp, purposeful. Night fell fast. In the half-light, their white coats glowed around Amara's darker silhouette. Suri stopped a few paces away. She did not roar. She did not need to. Her silence was colder than sound. She stepped closer, shoulders squared, every line of her body heavy with command. Amara stayed still. Shadow pressed against her foreleg. Ethan could almost hear the conversation, an ancient language of body and breath. Suri lowered her head. Amara lowered hers. A growl rumbled through the air like a tremor. Then another, deeper, older. Amara sank further, submitting but not retreating. When Suri stepped forward again, Amara shifted to block her cub. The standoff lasted 15 minutes. Power versus instinct. Dominance versus love. And out here, love was losing. Finally, Suri backed away, decision made. The pride turned as one and slipped into the darkness toward the east. Amara did not follow. She lay down slowly, breath shaking. The night filled with insects, distant hyenas, and the soft, uncertain cries of her smallest cub. Ethan wrote, handwriting uneven. Day 39. Pride fractured, black cub blamed, Amara isolated, instinct overpowering affection. By morning, the land looked clean again, as if nothing had happened. The pride rested near a dry stream bed, feeding on a small warthog caught in the night. Amara was missing. Ethan scanned the plain until he found her tracks leading north alone. He followed carefully. Amara moved slowly, her cubs trailing. The two white ones followed easily. Shadow lagged behind, panting with effort. Every few yards Amara turned to nudge him forward, patience steady but fading. They reached a small patch of thorn bush, the same kind of place where she had given birth weeks ago. There she stopped. The white cubs nursed. Shadow tried and failed to find space. When he whimpered, Amara glanced at him, then toward the horizon where dust rose in the direction of the pride. Her tail flicked once uncertain. She finished feeding the others, licked them clean, then stood. Shadow looked up, confused. Amara lowered her head and touched her nose to his. Brief, almost gentle. Then she turned away. 2 steps. 3. Shadow followed, crying softly. At the 4th, she spun, growled, and drove him back into the thorn. Not a roar, just enough to make him stop. He sat, head tilted, watching as she walked away with the 2 white cubs. Ethan gripped the steering wheel, heart pounding. He wanted to shout, to stop it, but he stayed silent. His camera trembled as he filmed the small black figure shrinking against endless gold. When Amara disappeared, Shadow cried until his voice broke into silence. Ethan wrote 1 line. Day 40. Amara has chosen. The sky that morning was a pale sheet of heat. Ethan had not slept. He kept replaying the moment Amara turned away. The hesitation, the backward glance, the thin cry that followed her into the tall grass. He drove out before sunrise, his old Land Cruiser rattling over the dry plain. The savannah looked endless, stripped of color, except for the faint shimmer where the sun began to rise. He parked near the thorn patch where he had last seen Amara. The ground was covered in prints Amara's paws, the smaller shapes of the white cubs, and then, apart from them, a lonely trail of lighter marks. He followed it. When he saw the cub, he stopped moving. Shadow lay curled under a low bush, a dark knot against the earth. His body barely moved. Every few seconds his ribs lifted and fell, shallow and weak. Flies clung to his fur, drawn to the dryness around his nose and eyes. Ethan felt the familiar conflict twist through him. He had sworn, like every conservationist, never to intervene. Nature has its laws. You document. You do not rescue. You do not rewrite. But this felt like betrayal disguised as discipline. He sat on a rock a few yards away. The camera rested uselessly in his lap. The cub opened his eyes once, unfocused, then closed them again. His breathing hitched half sigh, half plea. By noon, the air was thick enough to drink. Ethan's canteen was warm in his hand. No movement, only the whisper of insects. Only the land cooking itself beneath the sun. The radio crackled. Ethan, you're still out there. Grace's voice was small through static. He hesitated, then answered, I found him. A pause. Don't, she said quietly. You know what I mean. Don't make this yours. Nature's already decided. Ethan stared at the cub. Grace, he's barely breathing. That's what happens, she said. One dies, so the others live. You can't carry every broken thing back to camp. Silence stretched until the radio hissed and went quiet. Ethan waited another hour, then another. The cub's breathing slowed. Ethan began counting the seconds between each rise of his chest. The wind changed direction, and Ethan smelled decay, not from the cub, not yet, but from the earth itself. The smell that tells you how fast life returns to dust out here. Ethan stood. He walked back to the Jeep, opened the door, stopped. His reflection in the window looked tired, older. A small camera hung at his chest, the lens pointing nowhere. He thought of rules written by people far away in air-conditioned rooms. They were not here. They had not seen the cub's eyes. They had not heard that thin cry. He slammed the door shut and turned back. Shadow did not move when Ethan knelt beside him. Up close, Ethan could hear the faint whistle in his breathing, the rasp of life refusing to quit. He reached out, hesitated, then brushed the dirt from the cub's fur. Shadow's eyes opened dull, but aware. For a second, they locked on Ethan's. There was no fear there. Only exhaustion, the kind that comes when the fight has lasted too long and the world is too wide. "It's all right," Ethan whispered, voice rough. "You've done enough." He lifted the small body carefully and cradled it against his chest. The heat coming from it was frighteningly faint. He wrapped the cub in his jacket and carried him to the jeep. When he radioed Grace again, his voice was steady. "I'm bringing him in." Her answer came fast. "Ethan, no. That's against protocol. You'll lose your permit, maybe worse." "Then I'll lose it," Ethan said. "I'm not leaving him." "Hopin' no." A long silence. Then Grace's voice softened. "If you're going to do this, do it right. Straight to Aruchia Sanctuary. Don't stop. Keep him warm. And don't let anyone see you." Ethan exhaled a faint, humorless breath. "Copy that." The drive felt endless. The cub stirred once, letting out a weak, broken sound. Ethan talked to him quietly, nonsense words, the way people speak to something they're afraid to lose. Dust rose behind them like smoke. By the time he reached the sanctuary gates, the sun was setting in a red blaze. Grace was waiting, arms crossed, expression unreadable. She opened the back door without speaking. Ethan laid the small bundle on a table inside the clinic. Shadow's chest barely rose and fell. Grace looked at Ethan for a long time. "If this doesn't work," she said, "you don't get to feel righteous about it. I just want him to have a chance," Ethan replied. Grace nodded and began to work saline, antibiotics, milk replacer, warmed over a small flame. Her hands were efficient, her eyes steady. Hours passed. Shadow's breathing steadied a little. Grace covered him with a cloth and leaned back against the counter. "You realize," she said, "this changes everything. We can't put him back in the wild now. He's been touched, handled, he's ours." Ethan looked at the small shape under the cloth. "Then he's lucky we found him first." "I wasn't." Grace sighed, shaking her head. "No, Ethan, he's lucky you still believe luck means anything out here." Outside, the night cooled. Far away, thunder rolled. And at last, rain began to patter against the tin roof. Ethan sat beside the table long after Grace left. He listened to the rain and wondered whether he had saved one life or rewritten a story that was never meant to be changed. Morning came with the smell of wet earth and diesel. Ethan stepped into the clinic. Grace was already there, bent over notes beneath a cone of yellow light. Shadow lay on a folded blanket, breathing slow but steady, fragile rhythm, but rhythm all the same. Ethan had barely slept. The decision still echoed in his mind. Out here, the line between saving and interfering was razor thin, and he had crossed it without hesitation. Grace looked up. "He made it through the night," she said. "That alone is a miracle." Ethan released a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Then he's a fighter," he murmured. "Or stubborn?" Grace said. "We'll see which wins." Days became routine. Grace mixed formula and antibiotics. Ethan cleaned the cage, kept the space warm through cold Serengeti nights. Shadow gained strength in hesitant steps, first lifting his head, then crawling to the edge of the blanket. His fur, once dull and coarse, began to shine again, black as the deep hours before dawn. Ethan began calling him Shadow out loud. "You were supposed to disappear," he'd whisper. "And yet, here you are." The first time Shadow tried to stand, he wobbled, fell, and squeaked in surprise. Ethan laughed softly, unexpectedly. It had been a long time since anything in this place had made him laugh. Within 2 weeks, the cub was walking. Within a month, he followed Ethan from corner to corner, pawing at his boots, nipping with tiny teeth. Grace warned Ethan not to get too close. But even she began leaving her office door cracked so she could watch the little creature move. "You do realize," she said one evening, "you've created a problem." Ethan looked up. "I thought that was your department." Grace folded her arms. "You've imprinted him. He doesn't know he's a lion anymore. He knows you. Ethan leaned back. Maybe that's what keeps him alive. Grace gave a tired smile. You sound like every idealist who ever walked into this place. By the third month, Shadow was healthy enough for the open rehabilitation enclosure, a fenced stretch of land where rescued animals learned the ground again. Ethan watched from the gate as Shadow stepped into sunlight, lifted his head, and sniffed the air like he recognized the wild that had almost erased him. He belongs out there, Ethan said. Grace shook her head. He belongs nowhere now. Too tame for the wild. Too wild for the world. But the world wanted him anyway. A visiting journalist saw Shadow and posted a photo online. A black lion cub against gold grass. Blue eyes staring straight into the camera. The image spread like wildfire. Within days, news outlets called. People wanted interviews, footage, stories. They called him the Black Lion of Hope. Donations poured in enough to fund the sanctuary for a year. Ethan hated the attention, but he couldn't deny what it brought. He's helping, Grace said, even if he doesn't know it. And fame came with its own hunger. People wanted more. More photos. More videos. More proof miracles existed. Ethan found himself filming Shadow's first practice hunt inside the enclosure, his first roar, his first attempts to climb the rocks lining the fence. The videos reached millions. Messages arrived from strangers. He gives me hope. Please don't let him die. Behind every message, Ethan felt the same quiet guilt. Shadow's life had become a story for people who would never smell the dust or hear the lions at night. One evening, as the sun bled red over the plains, Ethan stood by the fence. Shadow lay in grass, lean and powerful now, his mane beginning to come in. Grace joined him, handing him a thermos. He's nearly a year old, she said. That's longer than anyone expected. Ethan nodded. He's tougher than he looks. Grace's expression softened. You know what comes next, don't you? They'll want him released. Donors, press, everyone. Return the lion to the wild sounds heroic. Ethan stared at Shadow. He's not ready. He'll never be ready, Grace said, but sometimes the story is bigger than the truth. That night, Ethan wrote, Shadow is alive, and that has changed everything for him, for us, for what people believe about mercy. But survival has its own cost. He paused, then added, he was never meant to live, but now that he has, the world won't let him disappear quietly. 4 years passed like sand through Ethan's hands. The sanctuary grew more fences, more volunteers, more eyes waiting for the next chapter of the Black Lion who should not have survived. Shadow became something between legend and symbol. Children wore shirts with his face. Magazines called him the miracle of the Serengeti. Inside the compound, behind sun-bleached signs and heavy wire, life was quieter and Shadow was restless. He had grown into a full adult male, taller than most, muscle rolling beneath that dark coat that still refused to reflect the sun. His mane came in late, but thick, deep copper under light, almost invisible at dusk. Every evening he paced the far edge of the enclosure, always facing east, where land ran open toward the horizon. Grace watched from the catwalk. He's restless, she said. Ethan nodded. He's been ready for months. Ready for what? Grace asked. To die faster, Ethan said, patient but firm. Or, he corrected, eyes on Shadow, to live properly. The debate dragged on. Conservation authorities, donors, scientists, all arguing. Releasing a lion raised by humans was reckless. Public pressure was heavier. Everyone wanted the ending they had already written. The lion set free, the circle closed. Finally, the government granted permission for a monitored release inside a protected zone near the Serengeti. It wasn't true freedom, but it was close enough for people to believe. Ethan didn't say what it really meant. Shadow would have to find his own place or die trying. The morning of the release was cool, fog lying low over the plains. Reporters gathered at the perimeter, cameras ready. Grace hated every second, but she stood beside Ethan anyway, arms crossed tight. If this goes wrong, she murmured, we'll be watching it live on every network. Ethan smiled without humor. Then, let's make sure it goes right. Hinguoed. Shadow waited in the transport cage, calm, alert. His eyes moved from Ethan to the horizon and back again. No fear, only recognition. When the latch dropped, the gate swung open with a metallic groan. For one heartbeat, no one moved. Then Shadow stepped forward, slow, deliberate, like a king reclaiming a throne. His paws sank into the dirt. The soft thud of contact between life and land sounded louder than any cheer. He paused once, turned his head toward Ethan, and released a low, breathy sound that might have been a growl or something closer to goodbye. Then he walked into tall grass and vanished. Reporters erupted, questions flew, cameras clicked. Ethan barely heard them. He stood watching the grass move long after Shadow disappeared, the wind brushing through it like fingers across a page turning to its final chapter. For the first time in years, the sanctuary felt empty. Grace pretended not to notice Ethan's cabin. Untouched meals, the quiet, the way he drove out alone each morning toward the release site. He told himself it was research, data, but deep down he knew it was simpler. He missed the sound of another heartbeat beside his own. Weeks passed. Tracks appeared faint, then clearer, large paw prints leading toward river valleys where prey was plentiful. Camera traps caught fragments, a black shape at dusk, blue eyes in the dark. Shadow was surviving. More than that, he was thriving. Then came the day that pulled everything back into a circle. Ethan's team was filming near the eastern edge of the reserve when a ranger called out, "Movement! Pride of 6, coming in from the hills." Ethan raised his binoculars. The lead lioness moved with power and precision. Her coat was pale white gold. A scar caught the sun along the rim of her left eye. Amara. The world went quiet inside Ethan's chest. Other lionesses trailed behind her, followed by 2 nearly grown cubs. They stopped to drink from a shallow river, unaware of watchers hidden nearby. Then across the clearing, grass moved. A darker shape emerged from the opposite side. Shadow, larger than any of them, dark as storm clouds gathering beyond the hills. He approached slowly, head lowered, every instinct alive. The pride stiffened, tails flicked. A lioness stepped forward with a low snarl, but Amara held her ground, eyes locked on the approaching stranger. Ethan whispered, uselessly, "Easy, boy, easy." Shadow stopped a few feet away. The tension was so thick the air seemed to hold its breath. Then, in a motion almost too gentle for a predator, he stepped closer, head still bowed. Amara moved first. She sniffed the air, then closed the distance until their noses nearly touched. A sound escaped her, half growl, half purr, a mother's recognition buried beneath years of instinct. For one heartbeat, they stood like statues in the wind. Then Amara leaned forward and pressed her head against Shadow's chest. The pride did not attack. They only watched. Grace lowered her binoculars, blinking fast. "Is that—" Ethan nodded. Voice rough. "That's her. That's his mother." Thunder hummed beyond the hills. Cicadas buzzed. Time stretched. Shadow's tail flicked once, twice. Then he turned toward the horizon, and Amara moved beside him, white and black, silhouettes against the setting sun. When they disappeared into tall grass, Ethan let out a breath that shook on its way out. He wiped his eyes before anyone could see. Later, driving back to camp, Grace broke the silence. "You realize no one will believe this when we tell it." Ethan smiled faintly, eyes on the road. "That's fine. Some things are meant to sound impossible. I'm a name." Days later, footage aired around the world. The reunion of the black lion and the mother who had once left him. People called it divine. A miracle. Proof that love could outlast evolution. For Ethan, it was quieter than that. Not spectacle, not redemption. Just the earth keeping a small promise. That what is lost can sometimes find its way home. That night, he wrote his last note in the worn journal. Shadow has returned to the wild. Amara still leads. The circle is complete. If love exists in nature, it moves in silence. After that day, the world moved on to newer stories. Out here, time moved slower, gentler. Every dawn looked the same. Golden light spilling across endless plains, distant roars breaking through mist, wind carrying dust, rain, and something older than memory. Shadow vanished after the reunion. Rangers' cameras caught him only in fragments. A flash of black fur in tall grass, a paw print near a watering hole, a shadow crossing the plain at dusk. Some believed he joined his mother's pride. Others thought he lived alone, as many males do. Ethan didn't need proof. He knew, deep in his bones, Shadow had found his place, whatever it was. Each week, Ethan drove to the edge of the reserve, notebook on his lap, binoculars in hand. He parked under the same acacia where he had first seen Amara years ago, where everything began. He never spoke, never called out. He only listened. The Serengeti talked back if you let it. Sometimes at sunset, when the horizon turned the color of old embers, he thought he heard a low rumble rolling through the air, never close, never clear, but deep enough to move through him like a heartbeat. He would smile and whisper, "I hear you, old friend." It no to stay. Grace eventually left the sanctuary for a university post in Nairobi. On her last night, she and Ethan sat by the fire, sparks rising into the wide African dark. "You changed the story," she said. "Not just for him, for everyone. You made people believe mercy still has a place in the wild." Ethan poked at the fire. "I didn't change anything. I just didn't look away." Grace smiled faintly. "Same thing, isn't it?" When she left the next morning, she pressed a notebook into his hand. Inside were her final research notes, and on the cover, in her handwriting, a single line: "Nature remembers kindness, even when we forget it." Years passed. The outside world spun faster, new wars, new screens, new noise. For Ethan, life slowed to the rhythm of wind. His hair grayed, his steps softened, his eyesight blurred at the edges. Still, he stayed. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Ethan climbed the ridge overlooking the plains. He carried no camera, only binoculars, and the old leather journal filled with years of dust and ink. Below, antelope moved in slow, rippling lines, and cicadas hummed like electricity. Then he saw it movement near the riverbank, almost invisible in dying light. At first he thought it was only shadow cast by cloud. Then it moved again, and the shape became clear. A large black male, his mane streaked with rust and silver. Shadow. Even from a distance, Ethan recognized the heavy stride, the way grass seemed to bow as he passed. Behind him, 3 younger lions followed a small pride of their own, and among them walked a white lioness with a scar beneath her left eye. Amara. Ethan's breath caught not in shock, but in something deeper, something like peace. They moved together, heads low, tails flicking in rhythm, cubs weaving between their legs. The family Ethan had once broken by intervening now stood whole again, restored not by human hands, but by time and grace. He lifted his binoculars one last time. They climbed a rocky mound at the edge of the plain. Shadow went first, standing tall against the horizon. The setting sun framed his dark mane in gold, turning him into a silhouette of fire and night. Amara joined him, pressing her head to his chest, the same way she had on the day they reunited. Below them, the younger lions sat, watching the world spread out cruel, vast, and beautiful. Ethan lowered his binoculars slowly. His eyes burned, but he didn't blink the tears away. He opened his journal and wrote the final entry. He was born from darkness, rejected by instinct, saved by mercy. He walked between 2 worlds, ours and theirs, and found light in both. If love exists beyond reason, it must live here, where the wild forgives. The wind rose, lifting the pages, whispering through the grass. Somewhere out there, a roar rolled across the plain, long and deep, like thunder. Not a warning, not a claim, something purer, something that felt like, "Thank you." Ethan closed the notebook, smiling to himself. "You did it," he said softly. "You found your way home." He turned his jeep back toward camp. The headlights cut 2 narrow paths through the dark, and for a fleeting moment he thought he saw movement beside him, just a flicker, a shape keeping pace before vanishing into the grass. He let out a quiet laugh. "Still watching me, huh?" That night, sleep came easily. The air was cool. Insects sang. Stars hung low and bright. Ethan dreamed of the cub he once carried in his arms, now a full-grown lion walking free beneath the same sky. Months later, his book was published, a simple collection of stories, notes, and photographs bound in worn leather. Its title read, "The Lion Born in Darkness." It was dedicated to two beings, to Amara, who taught me what a mother's love can endure, and to Shadow, who showed me what it means to survive it. The last photograph showed two lions on a ridge at sunset, one white, one black. Beneath it, Ethan had written, "In nature, difference is often punished, but in the heart, difference is the reason we remember."